Presenting Amareth the Lustrous, an EDH Enchantment combo deck. Thank you. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Crab Tribe. Today I want to do a short video, as short as I can, on Amareth the Lustrous, and give a short update to my deck, my EDH Commander deck, and how I've changed it around. It was based on land and landfall things, but now I've switched it up based on some feedback and some new cards I've come across, so it's all about enchantments. So let's go through this outline and talk about the deck, how it works. Hopefully by the end this will be helpful to you and you have some ideas of what to do. So who is the commander? Very simply, it is Amareth the Lustrous. She is a 6/6 flying creature that says whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, look at the top card of your library. If it shares a card type with that permanent, you may reveal that card and put it into your hand. So the general idea here is to have mostly permanents and have all of those permanents be the same type, whether that is enchantments, artifacts, creatures, lands, if you can make it work, or planeswalkers. So this is my deck. It is mostly enchantments. I have some creatures, but I guess about half of them are also enchantment creatures, so that counts for both enchantment and creatures. If you have things that are multi-types, that gives just greater likelihood you'll put them in your hand. And then I didn't really mess with my lands. There's only one enchantment land in the game. That is Urza Saga. And Urza Saga does not really help me too much because it tutors for an artifact. I have no artifacts. It does give you a construct, but I didn't really care too much about the constructs that much. I do have one non-permanent, Primal Surge, which I think we'll talk about in a minute. That's our big win con of the deck. I did want to talk about some of the other ways you could do the deck. You could build the deck. And one of the reasons I love this card so much, first of all, the art is beautiful, so I like that. But I love this card because it gives you a lot of options, a lot of flexibility. You can build it 5 or 6 different ways because there's that many permanent types in the game. So you could have all creatures, you could have all artifacts, mostly all enchantments like I do, and you could really have flexibility and creativity in building the deck. So we can just look at some examples here. Other decks on Moxfield besides mine, there's Landfall, there are enchantments, there's Blink if you want to get multiple ETBs and have an ETB theme, because that's what she cares about. You can have enchantments, you can have artifacts, and more flicker things. So yeah, I would just go through some of these and get different ideas about how to build the other card types. And I was really tempted to build the Artifact Tribe because artifacts also give you access to artifact lands, and that gives you more artifacts, obviously. So you could play an artifact land, and that triggers for one of your artifact creatures or just one of your artifacts. And that gives me a lot more than 48. I'd have, I don't know, maybe 80 or so. I could work my way up there. There's also a new card called the Encroaching Microsynth. It says non-land permanents you control are artifacts in addition to their other types. The same is true for permanent spells you control and non-permanent cards you own but are not on the battlefield. So cards that are not on the battlefield are, for example, in your library. So if I play a creature, it doesn't even have to be an artifact creature, but it will be an artifact creature when it enters the battlefield. And the next card in my library, as long as it is not a land, will be an artifact. So this is kind of a way to guarantee you get the right cards in your deck to put the next card in your hand. So you always want to refill your hand and give yourself more value. Have a full hand at all times to respond to things. So yeah. There's also a combo specifically with Amareth the Lustrous and the Sensei's Divining Top. So let's just say here, Sensei's Divining Top, quick review. It is a 1-cost artifact. You can pay 1 to rearrange the top 3 cards of your library, or you can tap it to draw a card, and then put Sensei's Divining Top on the top of its owner's library. So we take all that, Let's say I have a way to reduce the mana cost, so this is now a 0 cost or a free artifact. And it's in my hand, so I have this on the battlefield, this on the battlefield. And if I cast the top, it enters the battlefield, that triggers Amareth. And then I can hold priority there, and in response, tap the artifact. So you draw a card and then put this on top. And then you allow Amareth to trigger, so Amareth will look at the top card of his library, and the top card of your library, wouldn't you know, is in fact the top. And the top shares a card type with itself, so you put it into your hand, and then you can play it again and again and again forever. So that gives you infinite card draw and almost infinite storm, until you run out of library. So that is something very strong you can do in artifacts. So I thought I would give you that option and point it out. There's also the option of using battles, I suppose. I'm not really sure how this works entirely, and it is a new thing with not a ton of cards in the card type. However, it is a permanent, so it does count for Amareth, I believe, because you put it under your control, so it still triggers Amareth. So I think it'd be really cool one day to have a battle deck with Amareth, and you call it the Battleship deck. And then you have the artifact deck, and then you have the enchantment deck, and maybe a creature deck, and they're all fighting each other in one pod. Wouldn't that be cool to see what permanent type is the best? But anyway, this is my deck. It has all these enchantments. I just chose all the ones I had that have the best value, and bought quite a few more to really beef it up. I have no artifacts, so I don't have a soul ring, none of those ramps. I'm trying to go heavy on the enchantments to really just have all the triggers from Amareth and just constantly put cards in my hand. So let me turn on my tags here. So I tried to make sure everything has a justification. So I have some combo pieces that we'll talk about. I have 2 cards that act like counterspells, where they control the board by preventing counters. Decree of Silence and Destiny Spinner. I've got this buff here that gives an anthem to non-tokens. That's going to be important. I've got a lot of draw engine because I'm going to want to draw these cards and put them in my hand so that I can play them together. I've got a lot of stacks to really control the game and buy me time because you just want to have a chance to get these cards out. I have a lot of ramp so that I can play all the cards I can. It's very important because our big card here is a 12 cost, and that's going to be our win con here. So we want to have a lot of mana at all times. So yeah, let's talk about the fun cards, all the enchantments that are part of combos. Such as the Enchanted Evening, which actually makes all permanents enchantments in addition to their other types. So right away, the saltiest thing you could do is use Opalescence. Opalescence turns all enchantments into enchantment creatures with a power toughness equal to their mana value. And guess what? Lands have a 0 mana value, so do tokens. So those are all immediately destroyed as a state-based action, which is why it's important to have that Anthem I mentioned earlier, or to have Elish Norn, who's also in the deck. The Aura Thief. The Aura Thief dies, you gain control of all enchantments, and with Enchanted Evening, that means you gain control of everything everyone has. So that is pretty good. You can kill it with one of our sack outlets, and hopefully no one kills it in combat. They're not a dummy. The Sphere of Safety. They have to pay X for each creature attacking, where X is the number of enchantments you control. So with the Enchanted Evening, that's going to be at least 5. Probably it's going to be more than 10 by that point. So you're going to be safe for a majority of the game. The Archon of Sun's Grace, finally, has a constellation that creates a Pegasus. And the Pegasus will also be an enchantment itself with Enchanted Evening, so that you will have an infinite loop of Pegasi entering the battlefield. And you could win the game with the Sage of Mysteries. It's a Constellation Mill card I have. You could also remove the Archon instantly with one of our sack outlets. And otherwise the game ends in a tie, and you probably don't want that. And then we have Solemnity. Solemnity says that players can't get counters, so forget all that infect. You'll never get infect counters with Solemnity. Also, neither will your opponents. But more importantly, it says counters cannot be put on artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or lands. So Elephant Grass and Glacial Chasm have an upkeep cost, and upkeep cost is applied through age counters on each upkeep. You put an age counter, and then you have to pay the cost equal to the age counters. But we don't have to do that. We don't have to remember all that nonsense because we'll never get an age counter with Solemnity. So basically, Elephant Grass is a permanent stack piece. Black creatures can't attack you, and non-black creatures have to pay 2 for each attacking creature. But then, even if they can attack us, Glacial Chasm reduces that damage to 0, with the downside that you can't attack. I don't really care about that. This is not really a damage dealing or attacking deck, so that's okay with me. And then the Decree of Silence, the card we mentioned before. Normally, it would only counter the next 3 spells and then be sacrificed after it has 3 depletion counters. However, if it never gets a depletion counter, then basically it just counters every card my opponent, every spell my opponent plays. So it really locks out the game, and you have a big advantage. And then Dark Depths, just as the last example, it enters the battlefield with no ice counters, so you get Mirror Lodge right away. Kodama of the East Tree, next combo. So Kodama, he is not really related to the commander here, but he is related to ETB, so that is a bit of a theme. If you have Spore Mound, Emiria's Angel, or Feldar's Retreat, you have a landfall that makes a token. That's what we care about. So if Kodama's out, and let's say Spore Mound is out, so if I play a land now, that creates a sapling, and so let's say I play a bounce land, that's going to be what we need here. We play a bounce land, that gives us a sapling. I return the bounce land to my hand using its own ability. The sapling enters the battlefield and triggers Kodama, and then Kodama says you can put down a permanent with equal or lesser value to equal to the permanent that just entered the battlefield. So the sapling has a 0 CMC, and so does the land, so you can put down the land and then repeat the process over and over again. So if you like infinite tokens and infinite landfall, there you go. And then you can also use Spore Mound with Life and Limb. So Life and Limb says that all forest and all saplings are 1/1 saplings and forest. So when you play a land, that gives you a sapling from Spore Mound, and that sapling is also a land, so it triggers itself forever. It's a loop there, so it does give you an infinite number of saplings and lands, and it would end the game in a tie. However, you can remove Spore Mound instantly using Martyr's Cause as just one example here, which says you can sacrifice a creature to prevent the next source of damage to a creature or player. So what you could do is say you make 100,000 saplings and then sacrifice Spore Mound, and then you are left with 100,000 fodder to prevent that much damage from that many more sources. So you won't take damage for a very long time. And then we actually have no tutors in the deck per se, because we have only permanents except for one card. So we have to use Sterling Groove to search for enchantments, and we can recur that with Heliod's Generous Haul. But otherwise, yeah, you just search for the enchantment you need, you time it right, you get Enchanted Evening or Solemnity, and hopefully you win the game there. Otherwise, it just protects you, and that's pretty good. And then we have the Knights of the Reliquary, which says you can sacrifice a forest or a plains to search your library for a land card. It can be any land card. So you could get Dark Depths, you could get a bounce land for one of those other combos. And whatever you get is going to trigger a Retreat to Coral Helm there. And then you may tap or untap a creature, so you can untap the Knight and do it all over again. And then if you have this added piece here, the Wheel of Sun and Moon, and you enchant yourself, well, then the land that you sacrifice is going to be revealed and put in on the bottom of your library instead, so it doesn't go to the graveyard, and that allows you to repeat this forever. So you can kind of have infinite land there because you can tap the land as you sacrifice it. And then the Yagamaya's Cradle of Growth there at the bottom is just really good to help you get started and ensure that you always have a forest. So it doesn't matter what you search for will be a forest. And then here are just two other options to give you infinite mana. Kind of similar idea where Retreat to Coral Helm untaps either the Sakura Tribe Scout or the Ruin Ghost to repeat their ability. Either you put down a land, the bounce land, and then bounce the land itself with the Scout, or you can flicker a land with the Ruin Ghost, and then the land that you flicker comes back untapped, and triggers also Coral Helm to untap the Ghost. And either option here gives you a floating mana from the Lotus Cobra. So, I mean, again, not so related to the commander, but it's just good to give you infinite mana, which we're going to use in a minute. And it's just good for any Bant deck to use these. This does use the commander, and it does use our enchantment theme. It is the Sanctum Weaver and Penim's Aura. So you enchant the Sanctum Weaver with Penim's Aura, and then you tap it. And then you have 2 mana of any color. Well, you're going to have to make it blue, I guess, unless you have an island. And then you can untap it and just do it again and again forever. So that gives you infinite mana of 1 color, which is pretty good. And 2-card combos are great, so I recommend this. And all this infinite mana, all these ramp cards really just play into Primal Surge because it is a 12-cost card. Very hard to pull off normally, but if we have these combos and we don't just keep this in our hand forever, then we can do it. Because it says you exile the top card of your library. If that card is a permanent card, you may put it on the battlefield. If you do, repeat the process. So because Primal Surge is the only non-permanent card in the deck, you're going to potentially put down every card in your library onto the battlefield. I mean, you probably don't want to do that because you would deck yourself. So you can stop whenever you want because it's a May ability. Only thing is that the last card you do is going to be exiled because you have to exile the top card of your library. And as you're doing this, there's going to be a lot of ETB triggers that are piled up and waiting to happen. Your commander is going to be going off, so it's going to be great. So this is our win condition, and that's how we win the game, among other ways. Because basically, when you do this, all the combos we just mentioned are going to be put in the battlefield, assuming they're not already in the graveyard. So you'll get at least one of the combos, and you'll have all the stack pieces, so your opponents will be quite sad. And then here are some cards that I think are quite similar, so I might trade them out, or I might have both eventually. So Yorion is in the deck, and Yorion says when it enters the battlefield, you exile any number of other non-land permanents you own and control, and then return them to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. And very similar is Brago, King Eternal. The only thing is, it costs 1 less mana, but it has to deal damage to a player, combat damage to a player, in order to get the same effect. So they have to have no blockers, and then it has to have haste, otherwise you wait a turn, while Yorion gets the effect right away. But also, Yorion has to wait till the next end step to get him back, so that might not be in your favor. So very similar, 1 less mana, 1 more mana for different effects. And then Sigil of the Empty Throne versus the Hallowed Haunting. So the Sigil is pretty simple. When you cast an enchantment, you get a 4/4 Angel. Pretty simple, easy to understand. But the Hallowed Haunting, when you cast an enchantment spell, you get a Spirit Cleric with a power toughness equal to the number of spirits you control. So I'm fairly certain I don't have spirits in the deck. So it's going to be a 1/1, and it's going to be a 2/2, and a 3/3, and so on. So eventually it'll get a 4/4, but I'd rather just have a 4/4 right away. However, Hallowed Haunting does give you the advantage of having all your creatures potentially have flying and vigilance if you have 7 or more enchantments. So it's not too impossible by this point to have 4 mana and also 7 enchantments. But you know what? I'd rather just have the 4/4 Angel right away and make it simple. Up to you though. And then we have the Ancient Green Warden. So he's in the deck right now because he's related to ETBs, which is related to Amareth. So if I play a land, I get a landfall trigger, and then I actually get 2 landfall triggers, and then I also get to look at the top card of my library twice with Amareth, so potentially putting 2 cards in my hand. And then I can also play my Strip Mine every turn, play my Fabled Passage every turn. So it's pretty good. It's worked out so far. Nyx Bloom Ancient, though. They're also ancients. Kind of funny there. It is an enchantment, so that helps with my enchantment theme. And then you can tap a permanent for 3 times as much mana. So it is a lot more ramp, I think, a lot more value. I just don't have it, so if I do have it, I might switch it out. It is 1 more mana, but I think that 1 more mana compensates a lot more. And then finally, there are 2 cards here that I think are really good. They're obviously very good for the deck. They're just very cost prohibitive. So the only reason I don't have them is that they're quite expensive. The Academy Rector, if it dies, you put an enchantment from your library into play. So that's better than Sterling Groove, but it sits at about $80 right now. And then Sarah's Sanctum you could find for $200 to $250, but it just gives you a ton of white mana. So yeah, that is the deck. That's all I have for you today. Just wanted to show off how it's changed, and I want to hear your thoughts. How would you build the deck? What would you do different? I mean, I think I got all the good enchantments, you know, but maybe there's one I'm missing. And I'd love to hear from you guys. But that's all I have for you today. I hope to see you guys in the next video. And meanwhile, have a good one. Thank you.